Claire Morgan realized she had been cut out of Thanksgiving by accident at first, the way you notice silence only after expecting noise. Because November was already half gone, and no one had mentioned travel plans, recipes, or seating charts. And her phone stayed calm in a way that felt wrong. She checked the family group chat twice, then a third time, scrolling past old jokes and photos from last year until the truth pressed in slowly, and then all at once her family was planning Thanksgiving without her. And the thought followed her through her Seattle apartment as she dressed for work. Through the cold morning streets, and into the small publishing office where she spent most of her days shaping other people's stories while hers stayed politely unfinished, she told herself. There must be a reason. Maybe her mother assumed she was too busy. Maybe Emma thought she wouldn't want to travel. Maybe no one meant to hurt her at all, but the absence still landed heavy. Because Claire had always been the careful one, the sister who made space, who stepped back, who never complained. And as she sat at her desk that morning answering emails and editing manuscripts, she remembered past Thanksgivings too clearly, remembered setting extra plates, remembered helping her mother in the kitchen while Emma laughed from the living room, remembered how she had always felt slightly outside the frame. Present but quiet, needed but rarely asked how she was, and she wondered if this was the cost of being easy to overlook. The hours passed faster than she expected, and she leaned into work to avoid thinking. But just before noon, her receptionist buzzed her office, her voice hesitant, saying there was a visitor asking for her by name, a man who hadn't scheduled an appointment. And Claire almost told her to send him away until she heard the name Daniel Harris, and her breath caught so sharply she had to steady herself against the desk. Because Daniel was not just any visitor, he was her sister's husband, and she hadn't seen him in nearly a year, not since the last holiday gathering when everything had felt fragile beneath the smiles. When Claire had caught Daniel watching her from across the room with an expression she had pretended not to understand, she considered saying no, considered hiding behind a meeting or a deadline, but something in her refused to turn away. So she told the receptionist to send him in. And when Daniel stepped through the door, the office seemed smaller. Filled by his presence, he looked tired in a way that went beyond travel. His coat still on, his smile careful, and for a moment neither of them moved. Caught between familiarity and distance, Claire noticed the little details she wished she hadn't. The crease between his brows, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. And she reminded herself firmly that he belonged to her sister, that whatever she once felt had never been acted on and never would be. Daniel spoke her name gently, as if testing whether it was still safe between them, and she answered with equal restraint, offering him a seat, keeping her tone professional. But the past sat with him anyway, thick and unspoken. He glanced around her office, commented on the books, said it suited her. And the words touched her more than they should have, because they felt like being seen when he finally explained that he was in Seattle for work and thought he should stop by. She sensed there was more beneath the surface, something restless pushing him forward. And when he asked casually about her Thanksgiving plans, Claire felt a flash of heat behind her eyes. She shrugged and told him she didn't have any, that she would probably work. And Daniel frowned, clearly surprised, saying he thought she was coming home. And that simple sentence cracked something open, because it meant someone had noticed her absence, meant she had not vanished as completely as she feared. Claire kept her voice steady as she said she hadn't been invited. And the silence that followed was heavy and honest. Daniel looked genuinely unsettled, as if this was new information, as if it disturbed him in a way he hadn't expected. And for a brief moment, Claire allowed herself to wonder whether he had come for this reason alone, whether he had sensed the gap and followed it. But she pushed the thought aside. Because hope was dangerous, because she had spent years learning how to expect less. And as Daniel shifted in his chair and said he hadn't realized that things at home were complicated. Lately, Claire felt the room tilt slightly, aware that whatever conversation had just begun would not end easily, aware that his presence alone had changed the shape of her quiet day. And as rain tapped against the window and the city moved on outside, Claire understood that this Thanksgiving, whether she attended or not, was already different. Because someone had finally walked into her life and asked where she had been, and that question, unanswered, hung between them like the start of a story neither of them knew how to finish. Daniel did not stay long in Claire's office. But the air felt changed even after he suggested they step out for coffee across the street, and Claire agreed before, fully thinking it through, telling herself it was harmless, that public spaces kept things simple. And as they walked side by side under the gray Seattle sky, the distance between them felt both careful and charged. The kind that came from years of holding back words. Inside the cafe, the smell of coffee and baked bread wrapped around them. And they chose a small table near the window, talking at first about safe things like work and traffic and how long Daniel would be in town. Yet beneath every sentence lived the truth that this meeting was not accidental. Claire noticed the way he listened closely, how he waited instead of rushing her. And when the space finally quieted, Daniel asked gently why she had pulled away from the family. And Claire answered honestly that she hadn't pulled away at all. She had just learned not to reach when reaching made her feel small. She told him how being forgotten hurt more than being refused. And Daniel listened without interrupting, his face tight with regret, admitting that things with Emma had been strained for months. That small misunderstandings had grown heavy, that conversations turned into silence the way they sometimes do. When people are afraid of saying the wrong thing, Claire felt a mix of sympathy and caution, because she loved her sister and would never place herself between their marriage. But she also could not deny this strange comfort of being understood by him. Daniel confessed that he had noticed her absence at family events long before anyone said it out loud, that he saw how she always arrived with a smile and left without making a sound, and hearing that stirred something deep inside her, because it meant she had not been invisible after all. She tried to keep her voice calm as she reminded him that Emma was her sister and always came first, and Daniel nodded, agreeing, saying he respected her loyalty even when it hurt him. The honesty between them felt both relieving and dangerous, like standing too close to a fire on a cold night. They spoke of the past in careful pieces, of how once, before Emma, there had been a moment when their paths almost crossed differently, not with confession or action, but with a look that lingered longer than it should have. Claire admitted she had felt it too, then chose to step away because some feelings were not meant to grow. Daniel did not argue. He only said that choice had always stayed with him. The cafe grew busier, but their table felt untouched by time. And when Daniel mentioned Thanksgiving again, saying it didn't feel right without her there, Claire felt torn between wanting to believe him and needing to protect herself. She told him she had learned how quickly places filled when she left a seat open. And he responded quietly that sometimes families only notice the gap once someone points it out. The words sat heavy between them because they both knew his visit itself was that point. When Daniel checked his watch and said he should head back, Claire felt an unexpected tightness in her chest, surprised by how much she had leaned into this moment. They stood outside again beneath low clouds, close enough to feel warmth, but far enough to stay proper. Daniel thanked her for meeting him, saying he hadn't realized how much he needed the conversation. And before leaving, he told her that whatever happened, she mattered, not just as Emma's sister, but as herself. The words landed softly, yet deeply, and as he walked away, glancing back once with a look that carried too many unsaid things, Claire stood frozen on the sidewalk, knowing nothing physical had happened, yet feeling as though something important had shifted because she now carried the weight of being seen and the responsibility of knowing what that meant. And as she returned to her office alone, the thought followed her that some connections never fade. They only wait quietly until the moment they are noticed again. The days after meeting Daniel passed quickly for Claire, but the feeling he left behind moved slower, lingering in her thoughts as she worked late and walked home under early winter darkness. And she told herself again and again that nothing, had changed, that understanding did not equal permission. Yet the silence between her and the rest of the family grew louder. And when Daniel called 2 nights later asking if they could talk again, she hesitated only a moment before agreeing. They met at a quiet public park near the water where lights reflected softly on the surface, the open space making everything feel honest and safe. Daniel looked worn, his voice carrying weight as he admitted that his marriage to Emma was at a fragile point. Not broken, but strained by years of avoiding difficult conversations. And Claire listened carefully, keeping her heart guarded, reminding him gently that she could not be a place of escape. He agreed, saying he came not for comfort but for clarity, explaining that seeing her had reminded him of the person he was before he started choosing silence over truth. Claire told him she understood that pattern well, having lived it herself for years within her family, always smoothing edges, always stepping back so others would feel steady, and saying it out loud felt both freeing and painful. Daniel asked why she had never spoken up, and she answered simply that she feared becoming a problem instead of a presence. The honesty between them deepened, stripping away polite distance. And Claire admitted that the exclusion from Thanksgiving had hurt more than she expected. Not because of the holiday, but because it confirmed a long-held fear of being easy to forget. Daniel reacted with quiet anger at the situation, not toward her but toward the carelessness that allowed it, and he told her he had already spoken to her mother, pushing gently but firmly, making it clear that leaving Claire out was wrong. Claire felt a surge of mixed emotions, gratitude tangled with discomfort. Because being defended felt unfamiliar, they walked slowly as they talked, the cold air sharpening every word, and Daniel confessed that he had always admired her steadiness, that in moments when his own life felt unclear, he thought of her ability to stand alone without bitterness. Hearing that shook her more than any compliment ever had. Because it named a strength born from loneliness, Claire stopped walking and faced him, saying she needed to be clear that whatever feelings existed between them must stay unacted on. That she loved her sister and would not create harm. Daniel met her gaze and agreed without hesitation, saying boundaries mattered and that respect was the reason he trusted her. The relief in his answer allowed her to breathe easier. Yet the air between them remained charged with truth, not desire, but recognition. As if they finally saw each other as full people instead of careful roles, Daniel told her that Emma was not unkind, just distracted by her own needs, and Claire acknowledged that, adding that families often mistook quiet for contentment, and that perhaps this moment was not about blame but about speaking before silence grew permanent. As they reached the end of the path, Daniel stopped, saying that regardless of the outcome with Emma, he wanted Claire to know she had value that should never be negotiated. The sincerity in his voice left her shaken because it was something she had long needed to hear. They parted without lingering, without touch, each choosing restraint over impulse. And as Claire walked home alone, she felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because truths had been spoken, heavier because awareness brought responsibility. She realized that her life could no longer continue in the background of others' choices, and that whether Thanksgiving brought reconciliation or distance, she would no longer shrink herself to fit into places that forgot her. And with that, understanding settled quietly inside her, preparing her for the changes still to come. Thanksgiving morning arrived sooner than Claire expected. The city quiet and cold as she packed a small bag and stood by her apartment window watching light creep across the buildings. Still unsure if she was doing the right thing by going home, but the call from her mother 2 days earlier had been sincere, filled with pauses and admissions. And Claire had agreed not because she wanted everything to feel perfect, but because she wanted to show up as herself for once. She drove south through gray skies, letting the miles settle her thoughts, reminding herself that this trip was about honesty, not approval. When she arrived, the house looked the same, yet felt different. Familiar walls holding years of unspoken habits. Her mother greeted her with a careful smile that softened into relief, pulling her into a long embrace that said more than words. Inside the kitchen buzzed with quiet activity, relatives chatting, food warming. And then Emma appeared, her sister's expression guarded at first before cracking open. And they hugged awkwardly but sincerely. Emma admitted she hadn't realized how often Claire waited to be included, that she assumed she would always understand. And Claire told her gently that understanding without being asked still hurt. The conversation was uncomfortable but necessary, peeling away old assumptions, and when Daniel entered the room later, the air shifted slightly but held steady, his presence calm and respectful, offering nothing more than a brief nod and a warm smile that carried encouragement. At the table, the family gathered, and for the first time in years, Claire did not rush to serve or shrink. She took her seat and allowed space around her, answering questions honestly, laughing when it felt natural, letting quiet moments exist. Without filling them, during dinner, her mother apologized openly for overlooking her, admitting she had mistaken independence for lack of need, and Claire accepted the apology without minimizing her feelings. Understanding that healing required truth, Emma spoke to, acknowledging the ways she leaned into being the louder presence. Promising to listen more, Daniel remained quiet, supportive without directing attention toward himself, and Claire appreciated that deeply because it proved respect was not performative. After the meal, the family moved into the living room, stories flowing easier now, and Claire noticed how different it felt to be present without carrying responsibility for everyone else's comfort. Later, as dishes were cleared and people settled, Daniel found himself beside her near the window, speaking softly, telling her he was glad she came, that the day felt fuller with her there. Claire replied that she was glad too, meaning it in a grounded way that did not ask for more than what was appropriate. They shared a moment of calm understanding, nothing secret or hidden, just mutual recognition of the space they had created by choosing honesty over avoidance. As evening fell, Claire stepped outside for a breath of cold air, realizing that the ache she once associated with family had eased into something manageable, imperfect but real. She understood that this was not an ending wrapped in certainty, but a beginning shaped by clearer boundaries and renewed voice. When she left later that night, hugs lingered longer. Plans were spoken aloud instead of assumed. And as she drove back toward Seattle under a darkening sky, Claire felt steady, knowing she had reclaimed her place, not by demanding it, but by showing up fully, and while her feelings for Daniel remained quietly acknowledged and carefully contained. They no longer confused or unsettled her. It's because the most important relationship she had rebuilt was with herself, and that, more than any invitation, was what made this Thanksgiving different.